Literally, this is one of the most important speeches probably in the past few years, like as far as the political scene or the legal scene in the United States. So, of course, we're talking about Justice Thomas, and he gave about an hour presentation, sort of talking about progressivism, conservatism, the values that the country was founded on, and what we should be striving to achieve, and where we should go from here. You want to set this speech up a little, like before we get into the details of what he was saying?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I thought this was one of the most important political speeches of my life. And the reason is that Justice Thomas was laying out the foundational American morality. What is it that we as Americans believe? And this shouldn't be up for grabs. It's written down in the Declaration of Independence. We believe that all men are created equal, meaning equal moral worth, not equal abilities, equal moral worth, and that they were endowed by their creator with certain natural rights, amongst them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that the purpose of governments is to secure these rights. It's what our founders said. It's what we as a country, it's our founding belief. It is self-evidently true, as the founders said. And what he was contrasting it to is the progressivism that came into our country in the 1920s with Woodrow Wilson and John Dewey and people like this.
At the beginning of the 20th century, a new set of first principles of government was introduced into the American mainstream. The proponents of this new set of first principles, most prominent among them, the 28th president of our country, Woodrow Wilson, called it progressivism.
And what they wanted to do is progress beyond these values. No longer was it about liberty. It was about the government giving you things. It wasn't about you being an individual standing tall on your belief and your faith and, beholden to your creator. It was the government gives you rights. You're as equal as the government makes you. And it was a deeply moving speech, a deeply philosophic speech. But if you're somebody who follows this channel, if you follow somebody like Rob or you follow Andrew Wilson maybe, and you are invested in the idea of American philosophy and how that's inextricably interwoven with our faith and our faith in each other, this is an incredible speech.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's so funny how many people today speak for what the founders intended. And oftentimes what they're saying, I don't consider myself like a great student of history, but even a cursory look, you see a lot of people are putting words into the founders or the idea of what the creation of this country was about that don't match history whatsoever. For example, one of the big phrases that you would be totally excused for believing is how important democracy, particularly direct democracy, was to our founding fathers. It's not there. The word's not in the Constitution. And we are to believe that, they've perverted this idea of all men are created equal, like you said, to be like, well, through the government giving these rights. And so equity, or, we need to correct past harms and everything in order for the government to make people equal on like a scale of ability or a scale of worth. And that's not really what's going on. And I think that Thomas does an excellent job of sort of outlining that. Who was he giving this speech to? Do you know the organization?
He was at the University of Texas. So he was speaking there, and he gave about an hour remarks, and then he did a Q&A afterwards. And Rob, you're entirely right. Like the Declaration, and he said this in his remarks as well, but it states clearly the purpose of the government is to secure our God-given natural rights.
We are all equally created in the image and likeness of God. We are all endowed with the natural rights to life, liberty, and happiness. Our rights and our dignity are inherent. They do not come from others, and they do not come from the government.
And this is an important point that Thomas made. Your natural rights, and because I know people like Andrew oftentimes try to distinguish between moral rights and legal rights. Your natural rights are not legal rights, and God forbid they're not the human rights people are talking about.
Right.
Your natural rights are the dignities and moral features of you as a human. If you were starving on a desert island alone, you would still have them. And that's how you know that they don't come from the government. They come from our human nature and our relationship with our Creator. And Justice Thomas told this insane story. It really made me think. He grew up in the South in segregation. Segregation was still a thing when he was growing up.
When you lived in a segregated world with palpable discrimination, and the governments nearest to you enforced laws and customs that promoted unequal treatment, it was obvious that your rights or your dignity did not come from those governments, but rather from God. Though not a literate man, my grandfather often spoke of our rights and obligations coming from God, not from architects of segregation and discrimination. Men were not angels. They were subject to the constraints of antecedent rights, and we were not subject to those men, even as we were subjected to their whims.
So his government was telling him that he was lesser. He was worthless. He was not the same as white people and didn't have the same moral worth as white people. That's what his government was literally telling him. But, he said, his family weren't literate people. They weren't educated, but they believed in the values of the Declaration gospel.
The Declaration is, in fact, along with the Gospels, one of the greatest anti-slavery documents in the history of Western civilization.
They taught them gospel. So he knew that his moral worth was not less because the government lacked the power to make it so. And this is the key distinction. If your rights come from the government, you only have as much moral worth as the government gives you. But if your rights come from another source, from our Creator, then you have your moral worth always, no matter how many evil men try to suppress it or oppress you. And this totally destroys the oppressor-oppressor narrative because, yes, there are evil men and, yes, bad things happen to him, but it didn't shake his faith in his religion or his country because he knew who he was and where he stood. And this is a deeply powerful message. And it is totally contrary to what he exposed, which is the progressive status quo. Because the progressives, they're very clever with language games. They corrupted the values in the Declaration. So liberty became freedom the government gives you.
Correct.
Security becomes the government feeding you, right? And then they reframed the entire conversation, and classic liberalism became modern liberalism. And now people are saying, this modern liberalism sucks. Why is this so bad? Because it's not really liberalism.
That's right.
It's the progressive status quo.
That's exactly right. And here's a little snippet now. You could easily find this whole speech. It's on X.
Progressivism seeks to replace the basic premises of the Declaration of Independence, and hence our form of government. It holds that our rights and our dignities come not from God, but from government. It requires of the people a subservience and weakness incompatible with a constitution premised on the transcendent origin of our rights.
I mean, it's beautifully said.
Beautiful.
It's exactly what you're saying there. And it creates a weakness, right? Where, one of the things about having transcendental rights or rights from God is that there is no stronger basis that you could imagine than that. Rights being based on the government. Governments can be corrupt. Governments can be fallible. Governments can be disinterested, right? Governments can change. And so if your rights are based on those things, all of the rights are sort of built on a foundation of sin. And for example, if the government tomorrow says, you know what, you're right to if you say I have a right to privacy because the government tells me, and the government tomorrow says, no, you don't because we're worried about terrorism. Do you still have that right? Of course not. Not in the eyes of the government. And so if you rely on the government for those rights, quite literally, the government could say, you don't have it now. If you believe that your right exists beyond that government, then that's a right you could claim. Now, the government could use force to take that away from you, but you still say that the rights I have are superseded of the government right. And I think that's one of the things that we lose sight of. It's different. But I'll say when the crash course I got in postmodernism and debate in college, we talked about one postmodernist, Michel Foucault. He had this concept called biopower. And in a nutshell, this is the easiest way I could explain it. He's like, if you give the government the power to turn the lights on, you also give them the power to turn the lights off, right? In other words, if you rely on the government for your subsistence, that's all well and good. But if the government tomorrow says, you know what, we're no longer going to do that, you've given away your power. Now imagine that in the concept of rights. Once you rely on the government for, well, that's what's going to give me my right, you also give the government the power to take that away, right? Because you are now reliant on them and your moral justification goes away. If you're like, well, I have this right because the government. Okay, well, what if the government says no? You don't get to go, well, wait, I still have the right. You wouldn't.
And you couldn't, because you have no standard against which to measure the justice of the government. I just wanted to show this. If you guys want to see the whole speech, I did a live react to it a little bit ago. Just posted it yesterday. So if you want to see the speech, America's Rotting, Terrifying Ideology, go watch the video. You can find it there. And of course, if you're going to watch somebody's channel, you might as well watch mine.
Yes, of course.
But and we can take that. I mean, actually, go watch my video, but we can take it down. We don't need to be plugging the whole time. But grifting aside, the thing that Justice Thomas laid out, because I think Justice Thomas has a remarkable knowledge of U.S. history and U.S. philosophy. Like, I mean, you think about it, he's been a Supreme Court justice for 34 years. He's an originalist, so he spent a lifetime honing this knowledge. So he had the perfect historic example to give to prove your point perfectly, Rob. Not abstractly, just down the middle. The champion of modern progressivism, the man who said we should progress beyond the values in the Declaration of Independence, that this idea that your rights come from God is archaic and agrarian, and we need to have a better system. We need to be more like Europe. That's what he said. It's all nonsense. That man was President Woodrow Wilson. Now, here's another fun fact about President Woodrow Wilson. When he was the governor of New Jersey, he signed a law that created boards of experts that would sterilize citizens if they were too imbecilic to reproduce. Because if we got to have good genes in the gene pool. Yep. You don't have a natural right to pursue happiness. If you're an idiot, we should sterilize you. That way you don't have idiot kids that are going to screw it up for everybody. And his abhorrence for natural rights, for the Declaration of Independence, for true American values, was contrasted with his love of this other set of values, that the state should guide the people and should control the people. And where did he get that idea from? What was he modeling himself after? 1920s Germany.
Wilson and the progressives candidly admitted that they took it from Otto von Bismarck's Germany, whose state-centric society they admired. Progressives like Wilson argued that America needed to leave behind the principles of the founding and catch up with the more advanced and sophisticated system of relatively unimpeded state power.
That's what he was modeling himself after. Now, Rob, I don't know if you're a history buff.
I don't know if you guys are history buffs or not.
But it turns out that 1920s Germany was about to make a series of very bad decisions on the basis of the same ideology that Woodrow Wilson was championing. The idea that rights don't come from God, so we can do whatever the hell we want. That we're the government, we tell you what your rights are. And that was Nazi Germany, that was Stalin, that was Mao, that was the worst atrocities of the 20th century.
Woodrow Wilson, he may be our worst president. In fact, I think he is, right? He also brought us, in case for those of you watching that want to get pissed off, the income tax. Thank you, Woodrow Wilson. The Federal Reserve. Thank you, Woodrow Wilson. So, yeah, very bad. And was definitely like the elitist of his time. When you juxtapose him to people like Teddy Roosevelt and other folks like that around that time, like he was the exact opposite of that ledger as far as like elitist. The people that know more should make the decisions. You should have to rely on the government for your rights and for your protections and all of this stuff. And we're still bearing the fruits of that 100 years later.
Well, and so the income tax is a perfect example, Rob, because like if you have a Declaration of Independence-based view of America, then the federal government should be infringing on our liberty as little as possible. There's going to be some. Having a military, you might need to have people fight to get rid of the invaders. Like, there's going to be some infringement. I'm not so utopian that I think there'll be none, but it should be minimized. The income tax is not a minimal infringement. That's think about going from a world with no income tax to going to a world with income tax. The government has a totally different role in your life. They're allowed to reach into your pocket whenever they want. That's a different view of the government, and it's a different view of the country. And what Justice Thomas pointed out is that for a long time, this progressive vision, which has rebranded itself modern liberalism, and this classic Declaration of Independence vision have uneasily coexisted.
Since Wilson's presidency, progressivism has made many inroads into our system of government and our way of life. It has coexisted uneasily with the principles of the Declaration. Because it is opposed to those principles, it is not possible for the two to coexist forever.
But it's reaching a boiling point. The oil and the water aren't mixing anymore. Right. And a lot of our culture war, a lot of like the fight that people are talking about. Like when people ask me, Ryan, how can you possibly support Trump? You criticize him all the time. You criticize him on free speech. You criticize him on tariffs. You criticize him on this. You think he shouldn't have done the Jesus picture. He shouldn't have said this. He shouldn't have said treason, the seditious six. You were critical when he brought charges against Comey. You have all these criticisms about Trump, and I do. How could you possibly prefer him to Harris? Justice Thomas gave the answer. It's because there's a lot of stuff I don't like about Trump, but he is the only president I've ever seen who's been effective in rolling back progressivism. And that is the actual fight. That's the actual fight. It's the values of the Declaration versus the values of progressivism. And he's winning that fight. So it's hard for me to look the other way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that in a weird way, look, don't take this as me trying to defend Trump too much. I criticize him all the time, particularly lately. But in a weird way, the battle was being lost so much against progressivism that it was almost inevitable if someone was going to push back. It was going to be a boorish character, right? Mm-hmm. Like Trump, it was going to be tough for someone with a suit and a tie speaking politely. You know, like Thomas would be someone that would good that you can imagine. Mm-hmm. But to have the charisma and sort of to have the interest of the general populace in order to win a general election, it was going to take an interesting character, right? And, you know, a lot of what you see, I think, even from conservatives, like if you look at the traditional conservatives, like maybe a John Thune or something like that, that you see in the Senate, it's very much norms. And, we very much have to, go to the halls of Congress or go into these sacred halls and, have these robust debates. The progressives aren't interested in that. Right? Listen to James Carville this week that came out and was like, we're going to add Puerto Rico as a state. We're going to add D.C. as a state. We're going to add 4 justices to the court, right? We're going to end the filibuster. We're going to do all of this stuff, and we're not even going to run on it. In fact, don't run on it. Run on being a moderate and then do it. And they will, and they've been doing that. And, one of the things I talk about a lot is like the lawfare that I see. Even if you hate Trump, and that's perfectly fine, you should be against the weaponization of our FBI, of our intel agencies, of district attorneys all across the country that are specifically going after their political opposition. And I feel that it started with the people that are in positions of power in the establishment and going after people that are outsiders, people like Trump. So for me, I feel the same way, where it's like, look, it's easy for me to say this is better than the alternative because the alternative is basically further entrenching a system. And with this progressive stuff, the further you go down the hole, the harder it is to dig out of. This reminds me of the debate, and I watched the majority of this, that you had with Connor, right? Where Connor was like, I'm not a progressive. And you're like, but you're not defining progressive as it should be. By progressive, what you were basically saying is like, there's a fundamental question. Should people have their right to their own self-determination, or should the government be intervening to do what they think is best for them? And Connor's basically like, you're getting Connor to admit, like, people are too stupid to know what to do with their money. So the government should have to take the money and set it in funds. And people are too stupid to know what books to read. So the government should be like, here are the books. And he's basically like, yeah, that's the difference. And it's easy to see, there's problems with that, even if it's a benevolent and competent government. But what happens when there's a tendency to be like, well, wait a minute, we're going to be a little corrupt, or we're going to have some incompetence. Now, all of a sudden, you've relied on these institutions for your rights, and they don't know what they're doing, or they don't have your best interest at heart. And you can see how quickly we run afoul of the idea of things like, hey, we should all have the right to self-determination. No, the government disagrees now. This is the group that's important. And they're going to, and then the other thing is, as you know, and Thomas, it alludes to this, once you go down this road, every problem that arises, the answer is always, well, more government. The government causes some problems, so they don't say, whoa, let's pull back. The income tax, wasn't that supposed to be temporary? And now it's like, you can't imagine it. To suggest getting rid of it, I heard, who was it the other day? It was like AOC or something was talking about the nightmare vision of Republicans. They want to get rid of the income tax. Perish the thought. Like, that's some great evil. It's like, yeah. You know?
Well, but also, you got to you got to give, like, the devil credit where he's due, right? Like, the progressives, as it makes sense because they're kind of postmodern to their core, are very good at word games. So what they did, and you could see this in the way that Connor was talking about, because he's like, I'm not a progressive. I'm like, of course you're a progressive, for all the reasons you just said, Rob. But what they did, the reason he doesn't think they're a progressive is that the progressives did this. They changed the country, they changed the country, they changed the country. Then now you're here. And then they say, all this that we just did, that's the status quo. If you want to change that, you're a reactionary. You're crazy, right? And the progressives are the communists over here. But then it keeps on going, right? And this is why, like, I know that, like, Destiny and Wick and Co., they've been having this big thing about, like, we should exile Hassan. And I'm like, you guys don't understand. You guys are 20 years from being Hassan.
Yep.
He's just ahead of the curve. Like, there's no principal difference between you and him. What you have, because you emptied the philosophy, the American philosophy, this idea that our rights come from our creator. Once you believe that, you have a principled reason to reject Hassan. But then you have a principled reason to reject all of modern liberalism, right? But what they want to do is they want to say, no, Hassan's authoritarian and we value, we're anti-authoritarian. Well, it's like, well, why? Why are you anti-authoritarian? Because you have the right to self-determination and liberty. But you gave that up. You traded it for a hill of beans. People came to you and said, I'll give you some bread tomorrow if you give up your rights today. And you said yes. And then cleverly they rebranded that as liberalism. But it's not. There's nothing about it's unrelated to American liberalism. It's a totally progressive notion.
For those people, see, Hassan, I would put someone like Vosh. I'm not claiming to be an expert on either Hassan or Vosh. Like, I'm not horsing around here. We're not going to saddle up and make a bunch of horse puns about Vosh here or anything. But the difference with them is, like, they're more open and, with their beliefs. Like I remember Vosh, infamously, in my opinion, said, with Kyle Rittenhouse, his rights were to lay there and hope the mob didn't beat him to death. That was it. That was his option. He was not allowed to defend himself. So you can see, just at least he's honest with the insanity, though. He said he wants to see a world where people were taking shots out windows at groups like Patriot Prayer. That's Vosh. Destiny and them, they have principles. But the problem is, all of those principles are secondary to their highest principle, which is Orange Man Bad. And so, for example, they could be like, we are absolutely free speech. Absolutely free speech, and screw Trump when he said this about flag burning. Something I agree with, by the way. I think Trump goes too far in the flag burning stuff. But then when you're like, yeah, but you guys are like all about that the Twitter files were bullshit and who cares and blah, blah, blah. Because it's every one of their principles could be sacrificed to get the Orange Man. But the problem is, this has been the case with progressives for a long time. It's always, there's this one boogeyman. It's just, it was Bush. I mean, you're around the same age as me. People, if you're younger, you don't realize this. The left talks about George Bush now like he's this quirky old man. Oh, he's painting pictures and shit. And sometimes you'll see him at a Texas Rangers baseball game. Man, it was better when Bush was there. They wanted Bush tried in The Hague with Cheney. They wanted this dude executed. And now they're like, wow, they said Mitt Romney had binders full of women and we're going to put black people in chains. Mitt freaking Romney, milquetoast Mitt Romney, and so it's always, what they do is they're always like, what we believe is the status quo and that's okay. And these people over here further to the left are more radical. But if you look on a timeline, you can see how the Overton window shifts with even the moderate progressive. And so we're in this perverse position where basically Donald Trump is a 2006 Democrat. That's basically what he is. If you listen to a Trump speech on immigration and then go back to a 2006 Obama speech, They're almost identical. Or Hillary back in the day, she was like, we can't leave these illegals stay here. We can't have anchor babies. And now to even suggest it, if you're like, whoa, I don't know about this like birth tourism shit, they're like, you genocidal maniac, you fascist. And it's like, just 20 years ago, this was a mainstream Democrat talking point. Bernie Sanders, in 2014, you could find audio of him being like, open borders is a Koch brothers conspiracy. It's all about big business and right-wing donors, you know, and now it's like, if you say that, you're a racist. And so it's like, when I listen to these people on the left go, yeah, but that Hassan's a maniac. Hassan's just ahead of the curve. That's where you all will be if you continue to win. The only chance that these people don't become that is if the other side wins enough to force them to say, look, we have to check in our most radical impulses, because if not, we're going to lose general elections and we're going to lose power. But as long as they keep winning, they're going to keep, it's a runaway train. They can't stop it. They're adherent to the most radical voices by the nature of what progressivism is. There's too much incentive to use that government power.
And again, their philosophy lacks grounding, right? They'll say something like, I'm a liberal, so I like free speech. But why do you like free speech? It's not enough just to like it. That's a preference. Okay, you like it, but maybe tomorrow you won't like it as much because it's inconvenient. Why do you like it? Because of man's inherent dignity, man's freedom of conscience, man's right to self-determination. That's why we have freedom of speech. That's why we have freedom of religion. That's why we have the Second Amendment, because our natural rights come from our creator. And if you understand that the philosophy is grounded in that belief, then when someone says, I'd like you to sell your philosophy for a short-term benefit, you say, hell no. That's offensive to me. That's offensive to my beliefs. That's offensive to my relationship with God. This is not like, it's not up for sale. It's not up for sale. And I have this, Justice Thomas gave this quote, and I'm fond of it as well. So if you'll indulge
Do you want me to bring it up?
Oh, no, I'll just read it.
Okay.
But this is Calvin Coolidge, who was the last president who truly openly fought progressivism. He named it, he fought it, he understood it, he said the philosophy out loud. And he said this on the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Justice Thomas's speech was to celebrate the 250th anniversary. So 100 years earlier, this is what Calvin Coolidge said. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth and soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward, toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. And the reactionaries, Rob, have been winning. And that's the task in front of us, is to reinvigorate the American people around this American philosophy. And Justice Thomas, he laid out a siren song. This is the thing that we have to do. We have to do it right now. We have to do it today. We have to do it in our communities with each other. We have to talk about these values. And we have to do that because if we reignite these American values, the progressives will lose. Because progressivism is obviously contrary to these values.
Correct.
And if we let them die, the progressives will win. And honestly, I expect to see nothing but dirty tricks. Like he's corrupt, he's a bad, you're going to hear nothing but media smears about him for a week because of this. Because it was a call to action. The speech was a call to action.
Remember, get your super chats in. We will read them either during the show or after the show, we promise. Jefferson C. Post over on Ryan's channel gives $2, says, doesn't Hassan's progressivism mix with Islam too? Of course. And this goes to what you're saying. They don't have grounding. That's how you could have these inherent contradictions. Like, how could you consider yourself like pro LGBT rights, but you're also like pro Palestine or pro, the most absurd Islamic regimes? It doesn't matter, because for them, it's all about power. Once your grounding's not there, postmodernists talk about this a lot, right? I'm not deep philosophical, but it's the idea of this. If you have grounding, you have truth, right? You could say, my beliefs are based in this ground thing that's stable, a capital T truth. Postmodernist doesn't believe in that. They don't believe that there's capital T truth. They believe there's subjective truth. There's my truth and there's your truth, but there's not a universal truth. So the idea that we're all created equal is absurd, right? Because there is no universal truth. And so all that matters is power. And so my discussion with you right now, it's not us seeking to get to some truth and having some agreement on what the country should be about. It's me and you engaged in a power struggle. We might seem to agree, but in reality, it's a power struggle. And if there's no truth, then there's no lie, right? Now, this is a quite literal interpretation of what some of postmodernists suggest. But if you extrapolate that to a conversation of rights, well, it's how you're able to say, one of my favorite clips in the world, I played it last week. It's of Vosh, who I liken to Hassan in many ways. And he's watching a clip of these women. And they're on some program talking about horrible assaults that they've gone through. And Vosh pauses to stand on his soapbox and he says, oh, pretty much every woman I know has gone through this. And then this woman speaks up and she goes, well, I was in a country and I was assaulted. And because the person who assaulted me was Muslim, the local police didn't want to take it serious.
Yeah, because the perpetrator wasn't white. And because he was I'm, part of a certain religion.
Wait, are we being real?
And the police were basically just we can't because of cultural differences, which I don't feel like is such a good...
What? Bullshit! Are you fucking kidding me? Did she turn her fucking confession onto how the refugees, fucking Ahmed Muhammad, her and the police were like, oh, we can't persecute brown people? Bullshit!
And he's like, wait, what? This lying bitch? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how could you do that? And it's not a conscious action on his part, right? It's not a conscious action that he's like, oh, I'm going to cut. It's inherently, the tribalism is so strong, the my side versus your side so strong, and there's no fundamental grounding in that it just comes out that way. And so that's what you're talking about. When you talk about these people that don't have this grounding, it's how they're able to make all of these absurd, one of the stories we're going to talk about later is Eastman getting disbarred. Or the Twitter, certain things that they say you should be allowed to say online versus things that you aren't. Me and you'll struggle. We'll argue about people we've supported and say, we don't like what they're doing here. But them, they're just like, we don't care. If you're attacking someone we don't like, then it's all good. And so that's what happens when you adapt this progressive mindset and you don't have a grounding in sort of your fundamental and foundational beliefs, that all of a sudden everything's justified as long as it means you and your side's winning.
Yeah, and one of the things that Justice Thomas said, Rob, is that this idea is repugnant to American. He didn't say repugnant. That's me. But he said it's intention. But I'm being more forthright.
Sure.
It is contrary to American values.
Progressivism was the first mainstream American political movement, with the possible exception of the pro-slavery reactionaries on the eve of the Civil War, to openly oppose the principles of the Declaration.
And these values, he took us back to the Revolutionary War, right? When our founders wrote, we found these truths to be self-evidently true, that we have these natural rights from our Creator. Well, why do they have to say that? Because under English rule, there was no equal moral worth. The king had divine right, so you had no right to rebel against him. You had no moral worth compared to the king. This was the most revolutionary, radical idea in history. And it created the most free and prosperous country that has ever existed. And that's what the progressives are trying to erode. That's what they're trying to take away from us. And I'm a big scholar of the Declaration of Independence. I read it to my chat all the time. I argue about it all the time. I debate it all the time. Justice Thomas called our attention to a line that I've never talked about, but it was very important, and I didn't really think about this. These men, if they lost the war, they were committing treason. England was going to kill them, right? So that's how seriously they took these beliefs. And he, at the last line of the Declaration, says the following.
And for the support of this Declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I will say it again.
And for the support of this Declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And what his call to action is, can you do less than that? Can you do less than that? Because if you start talking about these values, the progressives in the room are going to try to shame you. They're going to make you feel uncomfortable about saying that you believe your rights come from God, that your rights are inalienable and don't come from the government, and that government rights, that's sand, that's preferences enacted into law. But our rights are not from the government, and we have inherent human dignity, and that you're willing to fight for that. This is a revolutionary idea, and people will ostracize you. The progressives will make you feel silly. They'll say, can you prove that? Can you ground that? They'll attack you. They'll make you want to feel small so that you give up this ground. But you must know that if this idea lives, they are destined to lose. That's it. If you teach your kids this idea, they are destined to lose. If you build communities around this idea, they are destined to lose. So this is Justice Thomas really, on some level, begging the American people to wake up and get out there and start actually organizing and talking to people and rekindling the flames of our uniquely American philosophy. Because they've abandoned it in Europe, Rob. They've abandoned it in Europe. It's up to us, like it always was.
How much of it do you think is like, I understand there's Europe, there's our Congress and our executive branch here, but do you think some of his speech has to do with maybe some frustration of what he's saying with like Ketanji Brown Jackson and some of her dissents?
He was really, really careful because he has great decorum in this way. Someone tried to ask him in the Q&A afterwards, like, oh, what do you think about the court? And he was kind of like, the most he'd say is he's like, oh, that court with Scalia, that was one of my favorite courts. I really enjoyed that. Mm-hmm. And then like not say anything about the modern court. So he is good like that. And that's a good tradition, by the way. Yeah, he's very careful. But I do think what he is saying is that there is a contrary tradition that's happening right now. And we saw this with a lot of legal decisions we've gone over, and maybe in the Boasberg decision we saw some of this, but we saw this in California, where that judge was, the law says there shall be no judicial review, and she interpreted it to mean I have power of judicial review. And you're like, well, how could you possibly come to that conclusion? It's like, well, those words don't have meanings, and I can reach any conclusion I want. And this is I don't think there's room for these ideas to coexist long term. Eventually, we're going to have to decide, are we living in the founders' America or Woodrow Wilson's America? And, personally, I'm not that big a fan of eugenics. So, right. I don't.
Really? Yeah. Real quick, Jefferson, again, thanks so much. Another 2 says, we saw what Islamists do to commies in Iran. The contradictions are endless, right? Between these groups that there's an affinity for the progressives and how they don't get along with each other. So kind of piggybacking off this, one of the things I saw some of the Live and Learn guys saying this, quoting Thomas's speech, and I think it was Josiah I saw saying this, was just like, this is outrageous. This is unbecoming of the court. How could he say something like this? So just to nip this in the bud, there is nothing about the decorum of the court. In fact, it's quite common for justices to give speeches on campuses, outlining their judicial philosophy, sort of talking about the philosophy of the framers, etc. This is not that uncommon, correct? And you didn't see this as anything of like him calling out liberals on the court or anything of that nature.
Well, first of all, I didn't take it that way at all. I think he was commenting. If you read the transcript, he didn't comment on one current event. Correct. In the speech. Not one current event, not one case. He was talking about philosophy and American history and his personal experiences with both exclusively. That's what he was talking about. Now, but I think the question that, if liberals are getting really offended by this, the question should be why? Justice Thomas said, I'm concerned that people are abandoning the values of the Declaration of Independence in the name of progressivism. And they go, that's outrageous for you to attack me that way. It's like, well, are you not abandoning those values? One easy thing you could say is, I'm not abandoning those values. But they're not saying that. They're not saying that, Rob, because they can't. Because they don't want those values. Because those values imply a limited government. If you believe that people are strong and independent and made in the image of God and entitled to self-determination, you give them liberty. You don't give them a nanny state. And that's this is the thing. Ultimately, they were called out directly without him ever saying their name because they can't deny that he's right about the fundamental philosophy.
They know it's them he's talking about because he's correctly outlined what they believe. If it wasn't, they'd say, well, it's not us. Sure, there might those. The other thing that's hilarious about that is we've seen liberal justices say far worse. For example, Ginsburg directly came out criticizing Trump in his first term, if you remember. Mm-hmm. She was forced to later apologize. And in fact, do we not have just this week, Sotomayor, right, has issued an apology for comments she's made about some of the conservatives on the bench. Is that not true?
Yeah. She made some remarks about Justice Kavanaugh. And it wasn't just that she made them; she wrote them in an opinion. And she's actually, I might be misremembering, but she had some sharp words about him, and she apologized, right? So it's not like, and that's, by the way, much more direct,
correct,
than anything Thomas said. Like, it was a direct comment about Kavanaugh. So it's not that justices never comment publicly, and also there's this kind of like, I don't know. Some of this is almost like pearl clutching in a way that's kind of, it's hard to take seriously. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like if a liberal comes in and they say, oh my God, it's beyond the pale that Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson would comment that they favor left-leaning things, and Justice Thomas and Alito commented that they favor right-leaning things. I mean, who possibly could have known that this was the alignment of the court? Like it's kind of a joke. Like we do understand that these justices are not blank slates. They have beliefs. They're people. I don't expect the left-leaning branch of the court to, side with the right-leaning branch of the court on every issue. I expect them to be judges and apply the law and apply their judicial philosophy as best they can. And by and large, they do. But, if we get to the point where one of the most learned men on the subject in America is inappropriate for sharing his wisdom on the subject in which he is one of the great living experts, what are we talking about?
Right. It's crazy.